Okay, good evening and welcome back to the session for Economics for Finance. In the morning, we covered about 1.5 chapters, and I saw that you had a number of queries. Of course, given the paucity of time, I was not able to take all of them. And following the suggestion from some of you that I should first cover the topic and then take questions, I decided to first cover the topic, but of course, given the rigor of the topic, I was not able to complete it. So what I plan to do is the following. I'll first complete the chapter 2, that is the determination of national income in the Keynesian model, along with, of course, some numericals. After that, I will take some numericals from the chapter on national income. And then I'll take the questions that have been posted by you on topic 1. Once I take the questions, then of course I'll move to topic 2. Topic 1, as you can see in your entire syllabus, topic 1 is the one which is analytical, and of course it has a number of numericals. So the other chapters mostly are descriptive in nature. So that is the reason it will take you some time to understand the first 2 chapters. Others will of course not be as rigorous. So give me a minute, let me first open your comments, and in the meanwhile, let me put before you the morning Word file so that you can take a quick look at what we were doing towards the end of the lecture. Okay, so before we finished the lecture in the morning, we were looking at the Keynesian model of income determination. We have seen that according to the Keynesian model of income determination, the equilibrium level of income is given by the condition that equilibrium level of output has to be equal to aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is your planned spending. Okay, equilibrium, we have discussed the concept. If output produced is not equal to aggregate demand, in that case, there will be some output left, which will be added to inventories. And of course, one would not like to keep adding to the inventories indefinitely. As a result, one will have to reduce the output in order to bring it equal to the level of aggregate demand. On the other hand, output is less than aggregate demand. In that case, one is running down inventories. And of course, one cannot keep running down inventories indefinitely. And therefore, one will have to raise the output to the level of aggregate demand. And Y is equal to aggregate demand. In that case, there is no reason for one to change the level of output produced. Okay, so the condition that Y is equal to aggregate demand is the condition for equilibrium level of output in the or income in the Keynesian model, and this highlights the key role of aggregate demand or planned spending in the Keynesian model. Okay, we are looking at the two-sector economy in which there are 2 sectors. One is household and other is the firms. So household add to the spending through consumption. Households consume. So consumption is their expenditure and the expenditure of firms is the investment expenditure. And therefore, in this 2-sector model, aggregate demand is equal to consumption plus investment. Okay. Consumption, according to Keynesian theory, is a function of disposable income. But in the 2-sector model, there is no government, so no direct taxes, and therefore disposable income is equal to total income. We assume, for the sake of simplicity, that consumption is equal to A plus BY, where A is a positive term which tells you what will be the level of aggregate consumption when y is equal to 0. This is called autonomous consumption. That means consumption level which is autonomous of income levels. And then b is a constant lying between 0 and 1. This gives you, as we can see here, this gives you delta c by delta y. That means the change in consumption per unit change in income level. When consumption income level changes, the change in consumption per unit income level is called MPC, marginal propensity to consume. Okay, we assume that this lies between 0 and 1. It is greater than 0, that means delta C by delta Y is greater than 0. When income rises, consumption rises. When income declines, consumption declines. However, it is less than 1, that means when income rises, consumption rises, but not by as much as the income has risen. Okay, APC is called the average propensity to consume, that is C by Y. In the morning, we were looking at a numerical example. Let me quickly take you through that. As we have assumed that C is equal to 500 plus 0.75y, that means the autonomous expenditure, consumption expenditure is equal to 500 and the MPC is equal to 0.75. Out of every additional 100 rupees rise in income, you consume 75 rupees. Okay. As income rises from 0 to 1000, consumption rises from 500 to 1250, a rise of 750. 1000 to 2000, it rises from 1250 to 2000, again by 750 and so on. The MPC remains constant as 0.75. On the other hand, APC is equal to change consumption by income. So this is, as you can see, goes on declining. The other important function is the saving function, which tells us how the level of savings changes as there is a change in income. Okay, savings is simply the amount of output that is not consumed. So savings is equal to y minus c. Therefore, since c is equal to a plus by, S will be equal to y minus a minus by. That is equal to minus a plus 1 minus by, as we have seen in the morning. You can see here, out of 1 additional rupee that you earn, if b rupees are consumed, then obviously 1 minus b rupees are saved. So b is the MPC, 1 minus b is the MPS. Okay, so if I go to this, one can see saving function will be S is equal to minus A plus 1 minus B times Y. So MPS is equal to 1 minus B is equal to MP 1 minus MPC. So MPC and MPS both add up to 1. It just shows that out of 1 rupee, whatever you do not consume is what you save. Okay, I will come back to this later when I look at the other way of looking at consumption expenditure. That is aggregate the condition of equilibrium. For me, let's now move to the determination of aggregate level of income. Aggregate level of income, as we have seen, is given by y is equal to AD, which is equal to C plus I, which is equal to A plus BY, plus let's assume that investment is autonomous. That means investment does not depend on anything. In the morning, there was a question as to why we are looking at only autonomous investment and not total investment. In this, for the sake of simplicity, we are assuming that investment is completely autonomous. We are assuming that in order to keep the model simple and derive the basic result. Okay. So let me call it I bar. Okay. And this, if I want to do it diagrammatically, we had seen in the morning that this line is my consumption line. See A plus BY. If I want to add investment to that, since I'm assuming that investment does not depend on income, investment will remain constant with the level of income. Here I'm measuring income. y. It should be clear. This is the aggregate demand. This is the 45-degree line. We had seen that 45-degree line has the advantage that if you want to compare some horizontal distance with some vertical distance, since we are measuring aggregate demand on the vertical axis and income on the horizontal axis, if you want to compare aggregate demand with income level, we have to have both either in terms of vertical distance or in terms of horizontal distance. This line allows us to convert this horizontal distance into this vertical distance. So at this level of y, look at this level of y. For this level of y, the level of income, the vertical distance corresponding to this is given by the point where this line meets the 45-degree line. So this corresponds to this level of income. This is the vertical distance. The aggregate demand corresponding to this is given by the point on the C plus I line. Okay. So at this level of y, this is the level of aggregate demand, but the level of income is only this much. That means aggregate demand exceeds income. So that means y will have to rise. On the other hand, for this level of y, you can see aggregate demand will be given by the point on the C plus I line, okay, which is only this much, but income will be read on the 45-degree line, and it is that much. That means income exceeds aggregate demand. That means you will have to reduce your income level. There is one point at which y is equal to 80, and that will be given by the point where this 45-degree line meets the C plus I line, and that will be this. So we have seen that if income is more, so this is the equilibrium level of income. If income level exceeds this equilibrium, y will decline. If y is less than this, then income will rise. The next question is, how to derive it mathematically? What is this level? Okay, so let's come to that now. Let's derive it mathematically. If I want to solve this equation, I'll get 1 minus b y is equal to a plus y minus 1 minus b y is equal to a plus I bar, and this gives me y is equal to a plus I bar by 1 minus b. Okay, let me take a numerical example. Let me just continue with the example that I have already taken. Suppose C is equal to 500 plus 0.75 y, and let me assume that my investment is equal to say 1000. Okay, so aggregate demand will be equal to C plus I is equal to 500 plus 0.75 y plus 1000, that is 1500 plus 0.75 y. This gives me, in equilibrium, y has to be equal to AD. This is equal to 1500 plus 0.75 y. This gives me y minus 0.75 y. Y minus 0.75 y is equal to 0.25 y has to be equal to 1500. This means y is equal to 1500 minus this 1500 divided by 0.25 is equal to 6000. Okay, this is the equilibrium level of income. You can check that it is only at this level of income that Y will be equal to AD. As we have seen, if income level is less than this, AD will exceed Y, so output will have to be increased. If Y is greater than this level, then AD will be less than Y, so Y will have to be decreased. Let me check these values. Suppose I take the value. Suppose I take 4800. Suppose Y is equal to 4800. In that case, consumption will be equal to 500 plus 0.75 Y is equal to 500 plus 0.75 into 4800 is equal to 500 plus 3600 is equal to 4100, and therefore aggregate demand will be equal to 4100 plus investment is my 500 is equal to 4600. Sorry, it is investment is 1000. This will be equal to 5100. My income is only 4800. Okay, and my aggregate demand is 5100. That means income is less than, output is less than aggregate demand, so output will have to be raised. If you start with a level greater than Y naught, suppose Y is equal to 7200. In that case, C will be equal to 500 plus 0.75 Y is equal to 500 plus 0.75 into 7200. This will be equal to 500 plus 5400 is equal to 5900, and AD will be equal to investment. This consumption 5900 plus investment is equal to 1000 is equal to 6900. You may note this 6900 is less than 7200. That means output will have to be reduced. But if Y is equal to 6000, in that case C will be equal to 500 plus 0.75 Y will be equal to 500 plus 0.75 times 6000, which is equal to 500 plus 4500 is equal to 5000, and AD will be equal to 5000 is equal to 6000. So only when Y is equal to 6000 that AD will turn out to be equal to Y. If Y is greater than 6000, then aggregate demand will be less than Y, and therefore Y will have to be reduced. On the other hand, if Y is less than 6000, then AD is more than Y. That means Y will have to be raised. This is what we have seen in the equilibrium condition. Okay, so this is the equilibrium condition. There is another way of looking at the same condition, and that is called the injection leakage approach. This is also important, and there are many important macroeconomic results which could be understood with the help of this. This is called injection leakage approach. The basic idea is the following. In Keynesian theory, output depends on spending. Now, just look at it carefully. In this two-sector model, households are providing their services and therefore they are getting income. They are getting a level Y. Out of this, they are spending only C. So there is a leakage from this expenditure stream, that is C. Okay. If the spending is less than Y, current level of Y, then obviously Y will have to decline. Okay. If spending is more than current level of Y, then output will have to rise, as we have seen. But as we can see, out of Y rupees of income that households get by providing their factory services, they consume only C. So there is a gap between income and expenditure. That is C, that is S, that is your saving. Okay, in a way you can say this is the leakage from the expenditure stream. Okay, just think of a pipe as circular pipe in which at some point there is some leakage, and then you inject something at some point. If the leakage is more than what you are injecting, in that case the amount of water will go on declining in the pipe. If on the other hand the amount that you are injecting is more than the leakage, then the amount will go on rising. The amount will remain constant only if the amount that you are injecting is equal to the amount that is being leaked out. And that is the idea here. Also, you are looking at the expenditure stream here. The leakage is coming in the form of savings, and the injection, additional expenditure other than consumption, is coming from in the form of income. It should be clear for equilibrium, injection, this leakage should be equal to injection. This could be understood in the following, that is saving is equal to investment. There is another way of looking at this. You had said Y is equal to C plus I. Y has to be equal to aggregate demand, C plus I. Now this output that you have here is going to two uses. Either it is being consumed or it is being saved. So output has to be equal to aggregate demand. Demand is coming from consumption and investment. The aggregate demand is coming from consumption and investment, and the output level is being consumed, is being used for consumption and saving. Thus, as C is common on the two sides, so this condition gives me equilibrium condition is S has to be equal to I. Okay. Going by the above discussion that we have just had, it would mean minus A plus 1 minus B Y has to be equal to I. If you solve this, you will get the same expression that we had got here. This expression. That means the two are equivalent. Okay. So the point is there are two ways of looking at the equilibrium condition in the Keynesian model. The first approach is that of looking at the output and aggregate demand. The equilibrium condition is output has to be equal to aggregate demand. And the other way of looking at it is injection expenditure approach. Before I proceed further, let me quickly discuss how this can be discussed diagrammatically. And instead of drawing the diagram, I will rather look at the diagram from your book directly so that we can save on some time involved in making the diagram. This we had derived in the morning. This is the consumption function. This is the 45-degree line. So at this point, consumption, at this level of Y, this is the level of Y. This consumption is more than income, so there is this savings. On the other hand, at this level, income level is more than the consumption level, so there is positive saving. You can see this gap between the two gives us the saving investment gap. Here the saving is negative because this income level is below the consumption level. Here income is more than consumption, so saving is positive. Okay, where C, the point where C is equal to Y, the line where this consumption function intersects the 45-degree line gives us the point where C is equal to 0 because Y is equal to C. Okay, now we want to have the line where we want to see how we get the point of S is equal to I. Okay, we are assuming that investment is autonomous. Autonomous means it does not depend on the income level. Okay, since it doesn't depend on the income, that means it will be shown by a parallel line. If we show a parallel line here, the point where this parallel line meets this saving function will give us the point of equilibrium. And this is precisely what is shown here. Look at this diagram carefully. This is directly from your reading material. At this point, C plus I is equal to this much. This is aggregate demand. This is equal to Y. This is also the point where S is equal to I. At this point, S is more than I. Saving is more than I. That is, leakage is more than injection. Okay, if saving is more than, as you can understand, if leakage is more than injection, then obviously Y will decline. Okay, the other way of looking at it would be here, investment being given autonomously, saving has to decline, and saving can decline only if Y declines, so Y will decline. On the other hand, at a point like this, saving is less than investment, so leakage is less than injection, the output will rise. Okay, so this is the other way of looking at this. We have already done the numerical example. Now let's look at one very important part of the Keynesian theory, namely the investment multiplier. The basic question that I want to ask here is the following. Suppose there is a rise in autonomous investment. What will be the total amount of rise in aggregate level of income? If autonomous that is the question. Okay, in order to answer this question, please look at this question in the following way. The equilibrium condition is Y has to be equal to AD, which is equal to C plus I, which is equal to A plus BY plus I. Now look at this equation very carefully. When there is a rise in I, then Y, initially suppose these were equal, so initially we were in the initial equilibrium level of income. As there is a rise in investment, this aggregate demand exceeds income level, and therefore income has to rise. Okay, suppose this investment rises by an amount delta I plus, suppose it rises by this amount. In that case, we know that Y will change by an amount. Initially, Y will change by an amount delta I. Okay, but now think about the following. As income is changing by the amount delta I, please note that this consumption also depends on income. So as income changes by delta I, we have seen above that, please look at this expression. Look at this expression. Change in consumption divided by change in income is equal to B. That means change in consumption will be equal to B times change in income. Okay. Look at this. Here, income is changing by delta I, so consumption will change by C times, it is B times I. So even though income level has risen by the amount required to bring the new level of output equal to the new level of aggregate demand caused by this level, since the consumption responds to income, in consumption will rise further by this, and therefore in the next round income will have to rise by this additional amount. Okay, but as the income rises by this additional amount, in the next round, as income rises by this additional amount, please note that consumption will rise further by B times this amount. That means by B so what we get is the following. Initially, there is a rise in investment by amount delta I, so income rises by delta I. But this rise in income by delta I leads to rise in consumption by amount B times delta I. So income has to rise by B times delta I. But as income rises by B times delta I, consumption rises further by B squared delta output. So look at the total amount of rise in consumption. It will be delta I plus B delta I plus B squared delta I and so on. So the total amount of rise, so but you can see this, since B is less than 1 in magnitude, the subsequent rises will keep on becoming smaller. So eventually it will converge to some level. Okay. So as a result, equilibrium level of income, those of you who have studied the geometric progression would recall that it will converge to the level which is equal to delta I by 1 minus B. Okay. We can also derive this equation directly, that if Y is equal to C plus, initially Y was equal to this level, initially Y was equal to this. Let me call it Y1. Y0, sorry. When consumption has risen, the new level as the investment has risen to the new level, it will be this, and therefore, so initially when I was equal to I bar, equilibrium level of income was this much. When I has risen to this, it will be this much. So the difference in income, equilibrium level of income, will be equal to if you subtract this from this, you get Please note that 1 minus b is less than 1 in magnitude. That means this delta y will be greater than delta I. Why is it so? The answer lies here. The total amount of rise will be this, because the expenditure depends on income level. Okay, this is the idea of multiplier effect. The idea is this delta y by delta I this delta y by delta I is equal to 1 by 1 minus b, which is greater than 1. That means a 1 rupee rise in autonomous investment will lead to more than 1 rupee rise in equilibrium level of income. And this happens because there is a multiplier effect. This value is called the multiplier. This value, delta y by delta I, this is called multiplier, investment multiplier. Investment multiplier, and this investment multiplier is greater than 1 because when there is a rise in autonomous investment, even though income rises initially by an amount equal to rise in autonomous investment, this leads to further rise in consumption expenditure, and therefore to equate the level of income to the new level of expenditure, income consumption has to go on rising till it stabilizes. Okay, that is the idea of investment multiplier, and it's a very important result. It should be clear, larger is the value of B, larger is the value of multiplier. Okay, we should be clear from here also, larger is the value of B, larger is the additional rise in aggregate demand. So for instance, suppose B is equal to 0.8. Initially suppose B is equal to 0.5. Is equal to 0.5, then the multiplier will be equal to 1 by 1 minus 0.5 is equal to 1 by 0.5 is equal to 2. Okay, but note that if this is equal to 0.75, then this will be 1 by 0.75, that is equal to 0.25. This will become 4. Okay, and if this 0.8, then this will be 1 minus 0.80, which is equal to 0.20, which will be 5. So as the value of B rises, the value of multiplier rises. And this is a very important point because it shows that as the investment fluctuates, the level of income will fluctuate by amounts larger than the fluctuations in investment. Okay, and this is one important reason why output fluctuates that much. Investment fluctuates, and that leads to fluctuations in output. But that also shows you how output can be raised. But to that I'll come in a short while. With this, now we can go to T-sector economy. T-sector economy is the economy where, if you have any questions, please leave the questions. You can send to me as query, and I'll take them up. T-sector economy. three-sector economy, there is government sector also. So we have households, firms, and the government. The presence of the government sector changes things in multiple ways. Again, the best way to start is to look at the circular flow of income. For that, let me take you to the diagram in your book so that we can save on some time. One point, as we have discussed, that the multiplier is equal to 1 by 1 minus b. It should be clear 1 minus b is your MPS. We can also say multiplier is equal to 1 by MPS. This is the circular flow of income in the three-sector economy. Look at this. This is organized into different markets, which is better. First of all, look at this. The product market. We have seen that in case of two-sector economy, the output is demanded by two sectors. One is the households and other is the firms. Households demand the output for consumption. So that is consumption expenditure. Firms demand for investment. That is investment expenditure. Now there is an additional demand. That is the government expenditure. Okay. This output is supplied by the firms. Okay. And this exchange of goods and services takes place in the product market. So if you look at this, in the product market, there are three arrows here. One is coming from the household, that is consumption expenditure. Another is coming from the firm, that is the investment expenditure. Third is coming from the government, that is the government purchases. C, I, and G. Okay, this total expenditure is going to the businesses in the form of total expenditure, and in turn, the businesses are providing them goods and services to the product market. From product market is coming to the three sectors. That is one. Number two, the factor services. We have seen factor. There are households provide factor services to the factor market, and in return they get the personal income. Okay. Third thing which appears here is that of the government levies taxes. So households are paying taxes to the government, businesses are paying taxes to the government. But then there are also transfer payments and subsidies. So government is giving transfer payments to the households and they are giving subsidies to the businesses. Finally, one very important point, that of financial markets. We have seen in case of the two-sector model that savings is equal to investment. Okay, investment is made by firms. And how are they able to make investment? They borrow the savings of the household sector. But now, when we have the government also, it is not just the firms which borrow from the government, but from the households, but also the government that borrows. And please keep this point in mind, because this point will become very important when we come to the discussion of fiscal policy in the next topic. Please keep in mind the savings are done by the households and the savings are utilized by government and the businesses. So the savings that the households have, these will be borrowed either by the firms for making investment expenditure or by the government. Okay. With this background, we can now analyze the government. Let me go back to the Three-sector economy, aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G. We have assumed that I doesn't depend on income, and we also continue to assume that G also doesn't depend on income. C, of course, is equal to A plus B by disposable income, and that is equal to A, B, Y minus T. For the sake of simplicity, we will assume that taxes are autonomous. Okay. In this case, therefore, aggregate demand will turn out to be equal to A plus B, Y minus T, plus I bar government investment autonomous plus autonomous government expenditure. Okay, for equilibrium, this has to be equal to Y. Okay, and if you solve this expression the way we did earlier, you will realize that it is simply it is simply a matter of, if you will have to shift By to this side, and then you solve for Y, you will get this simple mathematics you can do. I'll write the expression directly. Y in equilibrium will turn out to be equal to this is what it will turn out to be equal to. This is plain mathematics, you can do it yourself, so I'll not spend time on that. Look at the factors which affect the equilibrium level of income. It is A, we have already seen, I bar we have already seen, and 1 minus B. Okay, it shows that when there is a rise in investment by 1 unit, total Y will rise by I bar by change in I bar by 1 minus B, multiplier effect. Okay, now look at two additional variables. Sorry, this is B. Look at two additional variables which appear here. One is G bar, other is minus B T bar. And it is important for you to understand this, not only from the income determination point of view, but also from the fiscal policy point of view. If this is clear to you, then the discussion of fiscal policy will become easier for you. And the best way to understand, best point to understand this is here. When there is a rise in G, it will have a multiplier effect in the same way. You can see the G bar appears in the same way as I bar does. So effect of rise in G bar will be similar to that of rise in I bar. Okay, if the government raises government expenditure by 100 rupees, effect of that on the equilibrium level of income will be 100 times 1 minus B. So if B is equal to 0.8, we have seen multiplier will be equal to 5. So rise in government expenditure by 100 rupees will lead to rise in equilibrium level of income by 500 rupees. Okay, but a rise in tax will lead to lowering of this. You may note from this, rise in T leads to decline in Y. Why so? Please note, as T rises, the disposable income declines, and therefore consumption declines. So aggregate demand declines. So T is rising, disposable income is declining, and therefore consumption is declining. Therefore aggregate demand is declining, and as aggregate demand declines, equilibrium level of income declines. So government can raise level of Y by raising G bar, but it can reduce the level of equilibrium level of income by raising taxes. So there are two types of tools at the hand of the government going by this model. Let's look at it diagrammatically. we had done C, and if we add investment to that, we get C plus I, and C plus I is a parallel line above C. It is above C because investment is positive. It is a parallel line because I is constant. Similarly, G is positive, so the C plus I plus G will lie above C plus I, and this G is also autonomous. It doesn't depend on income level, so this will also be parallel to C and C plus I. So we get C plus I. Okay, so everything else remaining constant in this model, equilibrium level will be higher as compared to the case when there is no government expenditure. Okay, similarly to what we had done earlier, the injection leakage approach, we can also talk about the injection leakage approach in this case. Look at what happens to output now, and what are the type of injections. Apart from consumption, there are two injections to the expenditure stream. One is coming from firms, investment. Other is coming from the government expenditure. So total injection is equal to I plus G. And what are the leakages? From the amount Y that you have received as factor payment, you consume less than Y because you have to do two things. A, you have to give taxes to the government. T. And B, you are saving something. S. So two leakages, S and T. Two injections, I and G. So it should be clear the total that in equilibrium, the injection has to be equal to leakages, S plus T has to be equal to I plus G. And this is precisely what is shown here in the lower panel of this diagram. This is S plus T, this line. S is a positive function of income. So it's an upward sloping line. T we have assumed to be autonomous. It's a constant. So S plus T line is obtained by drawing a line parallel to the S line above the S line. I is a parallel line to this. If we add G to this, we get I plus G. Okay. The point where this I plus G intersects S plus T is the point of equilibrium, which is the same point as we get from this. Okay. Just to give you one more example, numerical, let me come back to this example. Look at this example. I had earlier worked with this example. I'll modify this example in the light of a three-sector economy. Let me assume that investment, that government expenditure is also equal to 1000 and tax is equal to, suppose, 1200. So my consumption will be equal to 500 plus 0.75 into 5 minus 1200 plus 1000 plus 1000 is equal to 500 plus 2000 minus 900 plus 0.75 into Y, which is equal to how much? 1600 plus 0.75 Y, and this has to be equal to Y for equilibrium. Therefore, I get Y is equal to 1600 divided by 1 minus 0.75, that is equal to 1600 divided by 0.25 is equal to 6400. Okay. If this taxes rise. Okay, suppose instead of 1200 taxes are say 1600. In that case, this will be how much? 1200, and this will only be 1300. And therefore, this will only be 5200. Higher is the level of taxes, lower is the equilibrium level of income. On the other hand, just like I, higher is the level of G, higher is the level of equilibrium level of income. So this is about the three-sector model. Finally, let's look at the four-sector economy. In the four-sector economy, we have households, business, government, and rest of the world. Let me look at the circular flow diagram first. Excuse me. Again, look at the product market first. Households, consumption expenditure, businesses, investment expenditure, government purchases. These are the three expenditures that we have already discussed. But now there is in addition fourth expenditure that is coming from the rest of the world, that is exports. So the domestic output demand for that is coming from four places now. A, households in terms of consumption expenditure. B, from the firms in terms of investment expenditure. C, from the government in the form of government expenditure. And finally, from the rest of the world in terms of exports. Okay. Now, there is another point. It is not that there is a demand for our products from the rest of the world. Our residents also demand the product from the rest of the world, and this is the import. So you can see consumption expenditure is part of this is going to product market, domestic, and part is going to the rest of the world. Okay, so there is a demand for our product from the rest of the world, and for the rest of the world product from our side. This is coming from product market, and this is the total expenditure on the domestic products, which is coming from going to the businesses, and in turn businesses are providing the goods. Okay. Then in terms of factor markets, we are not assuming any factor this. So, but then so far we had assumed that factors are hired by the businesses. So businesses were making factor payment, and those were being given to the households. But now the factor payments are also coming from elsewhere. You may note if you follow this arrow is coming from the rest of the world. Okay, one important type of factors that flows is the capital. Okay, so as a result, and capital, obviously, if you are investing in US securities, for instance, you will receive interest for that, and this is the remuneration for that factor market. Okay. Of course, if you look at the domestic financial market, this is something that we have already discussed, and the government, these two linkages we have already discussed. Okay, let's come quickly to the determination of equilibrium level of income. aggregate demand will be equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports. But then note that at least CIAG etc. can also fall on the imports. Okay, a part of expenditure that is coming from the household sector or the government or the firms or all three can fall on the imports, and therefore if we are concerned with the demand for the domestic products, which is what ADA is, we have to subtract imports. Or we say this is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. Okay, and we can likewise derive the expression for aggregate expenditure. But equilibrium level of income. Let me talk about two scenarios here. One scenario where net exports do not depend on income, and other scenarios which they actually do. Okay, if they don't depend on income, then the diagram is drawn in your book and it is pretty straightforward. It should be clear that diagrammatically the expression should be straightforward in that case. This is C plus, we have earlier seen C plus I plus G, and now we see C plus G plus I plus X minus M. If X minus M is positive, then this C plus I plus G plus X minus M will lie above C plus I plus G. Okay? And if X minus M is negative, then if imports exceed exports, which is what happens most of the times for the developing countries at least, in that case it will lie below C plus I plus G. Okay, so it is pretty straightforward. This is 45 degree line, this is the aggregate demand, and the point where the 45 degree, this aggregate demand line meets the 45 degree line will be the point where the equilibrium is established. Pretty straightforward, we have been doing it now for more than an hour. Similarly, looking at the injection leakage approach, now there are three leakages. A, leakages means the leakage from the local domestic expenditure stream. So the part of income which does not go for spending from home is a leakage. What are the leakages? A, the savings, B, the taxes, and C, imports. Imports, even though import is an expenditure, it is not an expenditure on the domestically produced goods. Okay, so as far as domestic production stream is concerned, domestic expenditure stream is concerned, it's a leakage. Okay, there is a misprint here, it should be C as plus T, S plus T plus M. But then the expenditure, export expenditure is actually an injection. Okay, apart from consumption, we have seen investment is an injection, G is an injection, X is an injection. So S plus T plus M has to be equal to I plus G plus X. This will be the case. But now let me look at a more realistic scenario. The case where the imports depend on income level, which should be clear to you because please look at this diagram, keep this in mind. This C plus I plus G plus X minus M is drawn to be flatter than C plus I line. Keep this in mind. I'm coming to that now. I'll write some expression in MS Word, so please keep this in mind. C plus I plus G plus X minus M is shown to be flatter than C plus I. Why is it so? Let's look at that now. We have already seen C is a positive function of Y. If we can assume T to be 0 for the sake of simplicity for now, that doesn't affect the discussion much. The fact remains that I is independent of Y, G is independent of Y. So if we look at the three of these, since C rises with the rise in Y, the sum of these three will rise with the rise in Y. But then when we are looking at the fourth sector economy, we also need to talk in terms of net exports. When we are talking about what happens to aggregate demand when there is a rise in Y, we also need to look at what happens to net exports. What is net exports? Net export is difference of exports and imports. exports can be assumed to be autonomous because these don't depend on domestic factor that much. Imports depend on domestic income. It should be clear to you, when the domestic income is high, you will import more. That means as income rises, imports rise. If exports are not affected by a rise in income and imports are rising, that means net exports will be a negative function of income. Let me assume that net exports is a negative function. Let me assume that is equal to nx bar minus v times y. If I do this here, I get aggregate demand is equal to A plus B y minus T plus I bar plus G bar plus minus V times Y, and this has to be equal to Y in equilibrium. If I solve this the way I had done earlier, I'll get Y is equal to A minus B times T plus I bar plus G bar plus bar divided by 1 minus B plus V. Comparing with the expression that we had got for a closed economy with the government, look at this expression. Let me paste the expression for closed economy also here only. This expression is what I got earlier. For closed economy, I have this expression. For open economy, I have this expression. Compare the two. Okay. Of course, nx bar is a new term that will appear here that we all understand. But look at the multiplier. Multiplier here is 1 minus b plus v. Here it is only 1 minus b. Okay. It should be clear v is a positive. This v tells you the amount by which your imports rise when there is a 1 rupee rise in income. So v is a positive term. Suppose 1 rupee rise in income leads to 10 paise rise in imports. Then v will be 0.1. And this, it should be clear that this will be, let me take a numerical example. Suppose B is equal to 0.8 and V or leather. E is equal to 0.1. Okay, in this case it should be clear the value of multiplier here will be equal to 1 by 1 minus 0.9 plus 0.1, that is 1 by 0.2 is equal to 5. But here it will be 1 by 1 minus 0.9 is equal to 10. So the value of multiplier here is more than the value of multiplier here. The value of multiplier in case of a closed economy is smaller than that in case of open economy. Why it is so? Leakages are larger. Go back to the process of multiplier. We had said multiplier process arises because when there is a rise in income, there is a rise in consumption. Okay, but please note here, due to this, so there is a rise in aggregate demand. Due to imports, a part of the additional rise in aggregate demand falls on the foreign produced goods. So on the amount of rise in demand for the domestically produced goods is smaller. Okay, so that is the reason in case of a closed economy, in case of open economy, the value of multiplier is smaller. First. Secondly, the domestic aggregate income can rise by rise in NX bar. It can decline by decline in NX bar. So when there is a rise in our exports for our country from abroad, it will lead to rise in our equilibrium level of income. And when there is a decline in exports or rise in imports of our country, it will lead to decline in our equilibrium level of income. Okay, I think this is all we need to discuss as far as the topic on income determination is concerned. If you have any questions, then I can take those first. If you feel the need before proceeding to topic 2, I can take some questions from the national income accounting also. Before I proceed further, let me take some questions. Numerical examples for national income I have not done. If you think I should be doing it, let me know. I'll do it tomorrow. For now, let me look at the questions, the other questions that I have received. Let me take the questions on the. I think in the morning I had done questions up to the income approach. Now let me look at the questions which have come afterwards. Well, there is a question regarding the formulae. Formulae is just to the derivation. Here, the derivation was just meant to give you actual idea about what is happening, so that you can understand it well. How far it appears in your exams is something that you need to clarify with the people in your institute. There is one question whether I can explain these equations in more easy language once again. Let me quickly go through that. It is. The the basic equation for Keynesian model is that for equilibrium, output has to be equal to aggregate demand. I have already explained that output has to be equal to aggregate demand, else output will either have to rise or it will have to decline. So equilibrium means state of no change for which Y is equal to AD. Consumption and investment are the two components of aggregate demand in case of two-sector model. Investment we are treating as autonomous, and consumption is assumed to be equal to A plus BY, where A is autonomous consumption and B is MPC. And if we equate this aggregate demand to Y, we get this expression with which I have already worked. It basically means that equilibrium level of income is a positive function of I bar and A. When there is a rise in autonomous consumption or autonomous investment, it will lead to rise in equilibrium level of income. Okay, and when there is the MPC is higher, even then this will be higher. Number one. Number two, for multiplier, expression is 1 by 1 minus B. Higher is the value of B, higher is the value of multiplier. This is another result. Third, for the government, we have seen government does three things. Government levies the two things rather. Government levies taxes, and of course it provides subsidies. So this T is net taxes, that is taxes minus subsidies. So disposable income. Okay, but for now just focus on the indirect taxes. So this is the disposable income, because aggregate expenditure stream is affected only by that, because it depends on disposable income. Consumption will depend on disposable income, and aggregate demand will be C plus I plus G. So expression for C is changed, and of course G appears here. So aggregate demand expression is changed, and therefore Y, equilibrium level of Y, will turn out to equal to this. Basically, this says that the effect of G is similar to that of I. Okay, the effect will be through multiplier. Okay, but the effect of T is in the opposite direction. I hope this is clear. And coming to this, when there is open economy, we have an additional component demand, that is net exports. Okay, net exports, there is another implication. When there is a rise in Y, demand for domestic goods rises because there is a consumption, but now a part of this demand for additional goods falls on the foreign goods. Therefore, the rise in Y, you can see earlier when the income rose by 1 rupee, the domestic expenditure rose by B rupees, but now it will rise by B minus B rupees, because a part of this will fall on the foreign produced goods and services. As I said, suppose out of 1 rupee you are spending 90 paisa. Now not this entire 90 paisa is falling on domestic goods, only 80 paisa is. So out of 9, you are spending 90 paisa out of 1 rupee, 80 paisa is falling on the domestically produced goods and services, 10 rupees falling on the foreign goods and services. And since the additional expenditure on the domestically produced goods is smaller, the value of multiplier is smaller. There was a question as to what is V in the book. V is nothing but the rise in Y, the rise in imports, change in imports per unit in income, and this is called propensity margin propensity to import. Okay. It should be clear, if margin propensity to import is higher, when the income rises, the rise in domestic expenditure is small, and therefore rise in domestic income is small, multiplier is small. Okay, so this is a summary of what we have done so far. If there is any question, ask right now, because we need to very fast move to the second topic. There are no other questions? Okay, there are questions. There is one question, is it required to study the figures and circular flows of the sector models? I think the understanding of the sectoral flows is important to have a clear picture about the macroeconomy. As for sector economy in detail, to get more clarity, as I said, in case of the four sector model, the aggregate demand is equal to C plus I G plus NX, that is X minus M. There is a demand for our products from the rest of the world, which is exports, but there is demand for the rest of the world products from our side, that is imports. If you want to look at the net demand for our good, that is obtained by adding net exports net of imports to the domestic demand C plus I plus G. Okay, and then this is clear. If I'll share this with you because there was a demand for this in the morning by someone, it will become clear further. Okay, then there is a question. What about the impact of rest of the world on FM? I am not clear as to what you mean by FM. I would request you to clarify what you mean by FM, and then I will try to explain it. Finally, there is a question of kindly give example for disposable income. Well, disposable income is simply income minus tax. So suppose the income in the economy is let me take you to this example which I had done. Okay, in this case, we had worked out, this is an example that we did when we were doing the 3-sector model. We have seen that in this case, Y will be equal to 6400. Okay, and from this we can derive YD, Y, which is equal to Y minus T will be equal to 6400 minus tax here is how much? It is 1200. So this will be equal to 5200. I hope this is clear. Well, I think from this question could be asked either way. It could be numerical based questions, it could be application oriented questions without numerical, it could be theoretical, all of that. And that is the reason, since in this there is a scope for asking application oriented and numerical questions, not just descriptive questions. That is the reason I have spent that much time on this topic. And I think the scope for numerical and application oriented is, I think, is very large in this topic. Okay, now let's move quickly to the topic 2. If you have any other questions, or if you want me to do some questions from the national income part, please do let me know. Graphs, I think it is necessary. There is a question on government disposable income. There is nothing called government disposable income. Now let's come to the next topic, that is the fiscal function of the government. That is topic 2. Let me start by asking the question as to why do we need to have a government? Okay, we have seen that it is the households who provide factor services. Using the factor services provided by the households, the firms produce output, and then the households consume that output. So why do we need the government? Okay, but if you look around, government plays an important role. And in fact, these days when we are going through this crisis, government's role becomes all the more important. Every other day, government comes out with some sort of announcement for something in terms of the economy. Okay? So the question is, why do we have the government? There was an economist, Richard Musgrave. He identified 3 roles for the government. One is the allocation function. Other is the distribution function. And third is the stabilization function. Stabilization function. In order to understand these functions, let me take you to the basic question that we ask in economics. We have scarce resources. And we need to satisfy unlimited wants. Okay. So the question is what to produce with these resources, how to produce, and for whom to produce? These are the three basic questions that arise before us. We have scarce resources and we have unlimited bonds. So there are so many things to be produced. Okay, there are demands of so many types. So we need to decide as to what to produce, how to produce whatever we decide to produce, and for whom to produce. The first question is basically related to allocation. Okay. Now, in order to answer this question, the first issue that comes to, so first these two, okay, are related to the allocation function. This question, there are two ways one can talk about this question. One is the markets. Okay, what do we mean by market? Market is basically work through price mechanism. The price signals. In the market, price signals are generated. On the basis of that, people decide as to what to produce. The price, obviously, there is something high price for some commodity. Obviously, the more of that will be produced. How to produce? Using the factors of production for which prices are lower. You have also profit maximization and cost minimization, the basic ideas underlying that. Okay, so the basic price signals for the factors of production and the different types of output decide as to what should be produced. Okay, if there is perfect competition and if the price signals are perfect, then it can be shown, then it has been shown that the market allocation will be welfare maximizing for the society. That means for the individuals, all the individuals in the economy, and households. But then there are problems. In many cases, market is not able to perform this role efficiently. That means it is not able to do it in such a manner that the profits, that the welfare of the overall society is maximized. Okay, firms are maximizing their own profits, they are minimizing their cost. Individuals are maximizing their own utility, but while doing this, the overall society's welfare is not getting maximized in many cases. Okay, this is not happening in the welfare maximizing manner. Why would it happen? Please note the following issues, the following prerequisites for the markets to perform its role well. We say price signals are generated. Price signals are, how are the price signals generated? Prices are determined by demand and supply conditions. Okay. What does demand curve give you? You must have seen this basic demand supply curve in your microeconomics course, that here you are measuring quantity, here you are measuring price, and then this is the demand curve, and this is the supply curve. So this is the quantity you produce, and this is the price at which it will be produced. Demand curve is supposed to give you the price that you will be willing to pay for buying this many units. Please keep in mind, price that you will be willing to pay. Okay, looking at all the benefits that you will be getting. And the supply curve will give you the price that the firms will be charging for the supplying the given number of units. That is the idea of supply curve. Okay, and the point where the demand and supply curves meet gives you that price quantity combination which is acceptable, which is optimal from the point of view of both firms and the individuals, suppliers, those who are demanding the given service or good. So this is the idea. Okay, but this assumes that demand and supply curves exist. Number one. Number two, for this allocation to be welfare maximizing for the society, there has to be competition. Okay. Third point, even if demand and supply curves exist, they may not be perfect. We have said the price that you'll be willing to pay. Maybe the price that you're willing to pay is such that it does not reflect all your benefits. Okay? Or look at the supply curve. The price at which you will be willing to supply these many units. This will reflect the cost of producing that many units. Okay? But there may be certain costs which are not included in this. So in that case, the demand and supply curves will not reflect what they are supposed to reflect. And therefore, the price signals will not reflect everything that they are supposed to reflect. And therefore, the allocation of resources based on these will not be efficient in terms of being welfare maximizing for the society. In order to then make this allocation welfare maximizing for the society, government has to pitch in. And that is the idea of allocation function, to make sure that the resources are allocated in the most efficient manner. Okay? If the market cannot do it, government has to intervene. That is the first part. Second part of the story. For whom to produce? Okay? How to produce, what to produce, this comes on to the allocation function. For whom to produce, this comes under the distribution function. This is basically, there should be and wealth in the economy. There are situations where some people have so high income and wealth that they can buy most of the things that they want. Okay. On the other hand, there are people who have difficulty even meeting their basic requirements for survival, basic food, basic shelter, basic clothing. It's just a very extreme example, but this is true. So everyone should have some, and it is quite clear, it is well established that if you are leaving the allocation of, if you are leaving the things to the market, then the distribution of income will not be equitable. Okay? And in order to make it equitable, the government has to intervene. There are many sections of the society which cannot participate in the economic activity, they cannot provide, okay? And as a result, their income is very, very low. Government has to provide them, because if you can, in the market economy, obviously you can buy things only if you have purchasing power. That means you have income, you have wealth. Okay? So in order to make sure that everyone has access to some basic needs, some basic things, everyone is able to fulfill one's basic need, the government has to intervene. Okay, and so there are several schemes that are run by the government. If you look around yourself, for instance, there is some, you must have heard about schemes like MNREGA. These are then if people don't have employment, so they don't have income, so at least government will provide them employment for 100 days in a year, so that they can earn something and fulfill their basic needs. You must have heard about unemployment allowances. You must have heard about old age pensions. You must have heard about widow pensions. Okay, these are all this in this form. You must have heard about the government's attempts to provide people food at subsidized prices. Okay, these are all attempts. Of course, in order to do that, the governments have to have revenues from somewhere, and for that they tax heavily the people who are well off. Okay, so it's a distribution of income. They redistribute income from the people who are well off, who have good income levels, to the people who do not have that high income levels so that they can meet their basic needs. Third function is so these two are microeconomic functions. Distribution, these two functions, allocation function and the distribution function are the microeconomic functions in nature. And stabilization function is macroeconomic in nature. The basic idea is the following. Stabilization function. If you are leaving the economy to itself, it may not be producing employment level. The prices may not be stable. So this is called stability, and there is price stability. By price stability, we mean the rate of inflation should be low and stable. Inflation, I hope you understand, inflation is about the rise in prices. So prices gradually keep rising over time. But then the idea, and of course it is accepted now that inflation, low level of inflation is good for the economy. If inflation is negative or zero, it is not good for the economy. It is now very well accepted in macroeconomics. Okay, but obviously it doesn't mean that inflation should be 10%, 12%, or it should be fluctuating. Inflation should be low and stable. So that is the idea of price stability. So if you are leaving the economy to itself, to the market forces completely, it may not be at full employment. There are fluctuations of economy around the full employment level of output, which are called the business cycles. Sometimes an economy is into recession, okay, output is below full employment level. Sometimes economy is in boom, output is above full employment level, which leads to inflation. Okay, so government has to play a role in ensuring that the economy remains close to full employment level. Since there are no large recessions. Okay, I think the best example of this is not best example in the sense that one example of this you can see these days. If you have been following the news, business news, you must have heard that there are fears about the economy going to very low growth rates in the current financial year, that is 2020-21. Okay, and government has to play an active role in order to falling this growth rate to low level, because if the growth rate falls to too low levels, it will mean huge unemployment. Okay, huge unemployment means people will be without incomes. Okay, so there are issues with this. So this is about the stabilization function. Government's role in order to ensure that the economy is at full employment, there is price stability. Then government has to play a role to promote the growth of the economy, growth rate of output over time, the long run. All these issues are there. But then there is one thing. There are different object functions and then there are conflicts. And second, is it feasible? There are two issues that need to be answered before we proceed further. A, is it desirable for the government to perform a role that is, because there are several issues that one needs to keep in mind practically when looking at this question. Desirability, the question about desirability arises from the fact that there are situations where the cost of the intervention is higher than the benefit from the intervention. B, many times the government doesn't have required information to make the correct intervention. And if that is the case, then the intervention may do more harm than good. Okay, so these questions are challenging. Second, there are conflicts among functions. It may happen that the policy that you are using in order to fulfill one function, this policy may turn out to be adverse from the point of view of some other function. That is also possible. Because if that is the case, then one has to choose between the two. Okay, one very good example of this, many times there is a conflict. Allocation and distribution functions. Many times the policies which are aimed at ensuring minimum levels of income to the people may affect the allocative efficiency adversely. Okay, so in such situation, government has to decide whether government has to do a balancing act between allocative efficiency and distributive efficiency, allocation, and between its allocative and distributive rules. Okay, these are fatal issues. Now let's discuss in detail the allocation function. Allocation function arises because the markets may fail to efficiently. Okay, and the government's role is required. The question is why might the markets fail to allocate the resources efficiently? There are several possible reasons for that. At least 3-4 reasons we can identify for that here. One is market power or monopoly power. The other is externalities. Third is public goods. And fourth is incomplete information. For market power, monopoly power, that is the first thing. Market power basically means that you can charge price ability to charge the price above marginal cost. Let me take you back to this diagram that we were discussing earlier. If you are able to charge only up to marginal cost, this will be a supply curve. But suppose you are charging more than that. Okay, for every level of quantity you are charging more than marginal cost. Suppose you are charging this much. Okay, you may note in this case the point of intersection of the two has shifted to the left. Shifted to the left means the quantity supplied will be lower than what would be supplied in the absence of such monopoly power. Okay, and of course the price charge will be higher. And both of these things are bad for the society. People have to pay higher price for the output that they are purchasing. Bad for the people. And then the quantity produced is less. So that is the idea of monopoly power. Okay, market power. So that is one thing. Then next is the issue of externalities. Externalities means there are certain fates that accrue to others, but these are not incorporated. That is not reflected demand supply curves. If there are certain benefits, look at the person who is demanding something. Okay, if there is some benefit by consuming that is accruing to not only to him but to the society, what will happen? That person is paying on the basis of the benefits that are accruing to him. but the benefit to the society is more than what that is equivalent to him. Okay, so the demand curve that his demand curve will not reflect that. If demand curve, how would the demand curve reflect that? Think about it. Let me come back to this example, this diagram. This is my demand curve. Okay, so for this quantity, I'm willing to pay this much because this is the private benefit that I draw. But if the benefit to the society is more than that, suppose I were willing to pay the amount that also takes into account, obviously if my benefit is larger, I would be willing to pay a higher amount. Okay, so if the benefit to the society is larger, and if I'm willing to pay the amount, keeping in mind the benefit to the society, I would be willing to pay a higher amount. And if I'm willing to pay a higher amount, in that case, my demand curve would be equal to this. As a result, prices would be high, and therefore the suppliers would be willing to supply more, and as a result, more would be supplied. Okay, the fact that the benefits I am not utilizing, that the benefits that are accruing to others on account of my consumption of something, these are not utilized. This means that there are certain benefits that I get that I am consuming the commodity, but by my consumption of that commodity, others are getting some benefit. So benefit to the society as a whole is more than the benefit that I am getting, and therefore I am paying for that. Okay, so in this case, the demand curve doesn't reflect to the gain to the entire society. Okay, similarly, there could be costs coming out of that. So those are called. So these are the costs. So we can basically say that if there are certain so these are also called spillover effects. Effects of consumption by me or production by me spill over to others, but these are not accounted for in the demand or supply curves, and as a result of that, the demand and supply curves do not come with exact information about the benefits or costs. Okay, and as a result, the production levels will be different from the levels which would be determining the levels which would be optimal from the entire society's point of view. To take examples of this, let me, one could be a poultry unit. Suppose there is a firm which is producing something. Suppose there is a firm which is producing, say, chemicals. Okay, and it is leaving some polluted with some liquids polluted with chemicals into a river nearby. What will happen as a result? The river will be polluted. And what are the costs to the society? There are some costs to the society. What will the components of cost to the firm itself, on the basis of which it will charge the price of its factors of production, and the price of its raw material. Okay, so that is a private cost. But look at the society as a whole. This pollutants that it is leaving into the river nearby will lead to problems for the fish there. It will lead to pollutants in the water, as a result of which people will suffer health problems, and due to that, they will have to install some purifiers, etc. In that, or maybe the government has to install a plant for purifying that water, which would not be required otherwise. Okay. So the cost to society by the process of production of these chemicals by this firm located on the bank of the river, this cost to the society is much more than the cost to the firm itself. Okay, so this is an example of negative externality coming out of production. Another example of this is that of a very common example is that of passive smoking. If one person is smoking near you, the cost to that person, that the person is drawing some benefit, but you are have to incur a cost. It is negative consumption externality. Externality arising out of consumption by someone to you. And that's negative externality, which should be very clear. There are negative issues, there are costs in terms of health by passive smoking. Okay. But then there are certain, there are things which have positive externalities also. Like for instance, suppose there is a communicable disease and some people are getting themselves immunized against that. If they are getting themselves immunized, they are getting immunized and they are paying for that because they think it will affect their health and efficiency in future. Okay, but then if they are getting immunized, then they will not get infected in future. Even they will not transmit the disease to the others. So they are getting immunized, but it has benefits to the others. Other very common positive externality good is education. You are getting educated. Today you are spending in education because you think by getting more education, you will be able to earn more. I'm just giving you an example. One thought in spending on education could be that it will help me get higher salary package in future. But if you are educated, there could be several other benefits to the society from your education. There might be people around you who might gain from you. There might be your friends who might gain from you. There might be others who can gain out of the education that you are getting. Okay. Of course, this is when you are not charging for this, for everything, every gain that the society is making out due to your being educated, and you did not pay the fees accordingly. Okay. So, but there are positive externalities. Okay? The point is in terms of when there are externalities, the gains to the society is gain or cost to the individual. So, for instance, looking at say negative production externality. Looking at that as an example, if you look at marginal social cost, it will be different from marginal going back to the example of the firm which is located at the bank of the river and it is adding pollutants to the river, the marginal cost of every unit of production to the firm simply includes the cost caused by the cost accruing due to payment to the factors of production and raw material. But to the society, it also includes the cost arising due to pollution. So we can say the marginal social cost is equal to marginal private cost plus external cost. Okay, and therefore, when this marginal social cost is less than marginal private cost, then the price signals that emanate from the market will not be the correct ones. In order to understand this, let me go back to the demand supply diagram that I was working with earlier. Let me come back to this. Suppose this is my marginal private cost. Private cost. Okay. Now, look at the social cost. As we have seen, social cost in case of negative production externality is higher than the marginal private cost. Okay. So, if we take that into account, you will see the cost for every number of unit, at every point on this axis will be higher than this. As a result, you can be seen the this will give you the marginal social cost. You may note, due to the presence of this negative externality, the output that is being produced will be more than the socially desirable output. If this cost had been taken into account by the production decisions of the firm, which would happen if the firm is made to pay the additional cost that the society has to incur, in that case, the production level would be only this much. Okay, and the cost would be, the price that people will have to pay will be higher. As a result, the demand will decline. Okay, the output that is being produced will decline. But in the absence of this, it will be higher. So this gives us gives us clearly one implication of this is that due to this, in case of such goods are overproduced. Similarly, it can be shown that in case of when there are positive externalities, then the goods will be underproduced. I have already given you an example of the case where if the benefits to the society are larger than the benefits to the individual, then the good will be underproduced. Okay, we have already seen this, so I'll not go into details of it further. Then there are goods called private public goods. This is something that requires some time. Although we are approaching 9 o'clock, I would like to extend by a few minutes, not much, but by a few minutes, so that we can look at this, we can finish this part of the topic. We are at present doing chapter 2 in the topic 2, so almost halfway through. Public goods, basically, before we look at public goods, we need to understand what are the attributes of private goods. The private goods are the goods which we generally talk about in economics and which are allocated by the market. There are three attributes which one clearly sees in the private goods. One is rivalry, other is excludability, and third is these are three attributes which the private goods have. Look at these very carefully. Let me discuss these three one by one. A rivalry means if one individual is using that, other cannot. Okay, so if there is a pen, I am using the pen as of at present, you can't use that pen. Okay, so it is a rivalrous. Excludability. Fee can be charged for its use. Okay, so the pen is, if you want to use the pen, I can charge you. Okay, otherwise I will not let you use my pen. Okay, and then divisibility. We can clearly see how many units are consumed. Okay, you are enjoying, say, you are enjoying, let me say, idli. So you can clearly have, say, whether you had 3 idlis or 4 idlis or 5. Okay, if you are buying pens, then you can clearly see you have bought 3 pens. You have consumed 3 pens during the month. Okay, you can clearly see. So these are the attributes of the private goods. This is very important. Please keep in mind, if one is using, then the other cannot. Okay, in that case, if you want to use that particular commodity, then you have to buy it. Okay, because if use of this commodity is being used by one person, and in that case the other person cannot use, and if the other person wants to use it at the same time, it has to be produced in the second quantity. Okay? The quantity for you, when I'm using it, you also want to use it at the same time, then that second unit has to be produced for you. Okay? You have to buy it, and secondly, fee can be charged for its use. Okay, so if fee can be charged, then you have to buy it. Okay? It is clearly divisible, so you have to clearly say 3 units, 4 units, or 5 units of pen. So since you have to pay for the units that you need to buy, okay, you cannot pay without being charged for it. You have to clearly reveal as to how many units are to be produced. So that means there is a clear demand curve for that. That is the idea of private goods. There is demand curve. And you know, it's how important it is to have a demand curve. Look at, on the other case, the public goods. Public goods are marked by just the opposite of that. These are non-rivalrous. Public goods are non-rivalrous, means if I am using it, nothing can prevent you from using it. One very good idea of this is the road light. If I am sitting under a lamp post, you want to sit and use the same light for whatever purpose. The fact that I am using the road light for some purpose does not prevent you from using it. Okay, that is what it is meant by being non-rivalrous. Secondly, fees cannot be charged for its use. Okay, how can one very good example of this is national defense. Okay, it is non-rivalrous in the sense that I am getting benefit of national defense doesn't mean that you cannot get the benefit of that. It is not excludable. No one can charge you fee for using the national defense or the police services. Okay, and third, divisibility. You cannot say that I have used more of road light than you have used, or I have used more of national defense than you have used. Okay, so this public goods have these 3 different attributes: a non-rivalrousness, then non-excludability, and third is indivisibility. There is another point that is discussed in your book at a different point, but I would like to discuss it right here. Non-excludability means another thing. If there is something which, if you want to use it and you don't want to pay, I can exclude you. So you cannot use it unless you are paying for that. That is the idea of exclusivity. If that is not the case, then what will happen? You can take advantage of that good or service without actually paying for that. This is called the free rider problem. Taking benefit of something if something is non-excludable, then you can free ride on that. You can take advantage of that. You can consume that without having to pay. You are paying for that. And if that is the case, then what is the incentive for you to pay for that? Okay. Then this is the question. Then it is a question of indivisibility. You cannot define as to whether you need to use 3 units or 5 units. I give the example of using the road light. I give the example of using national defense. In that case, you are not. There is no way you can reveal that. Okay, I need these many units. If there is something which is divisible, then you can say, suppose there are 3 individuals in the economy. Individual A is willing to buy 3 units, B is willing to buy 5 units, C is willing to buy 10 units at the prevailing price, then we can add up the different quantities that these 3 different people are willing to buy at the prevailing price, and we can say, yes, this is the number of units that for which there is a demand in the market. We can derive the demand curve. But that is not the case when there is non-excludability and indivisibility. Okay? And if your use of the commodity does not preclude its use by me, then there is a need for you to buy it again. You can simply keep using it when I am using it. Okay? So the point is, when due to these 3 attributes, non-rivalrousness, non-excludability, and indivisibility, the demand curves either do not exist, or these are, or we can say the actual, there is a problem of existence of demand curves. And if there are even if these demand curves do exist, these do not come with actual information. And therefore, the price signals that come out of this, either the demand curves don't exist, in that case, there are no price signals existing. And if there are no price signals existing, then obviously markets will not function. If there are goods for which the market demand curve does exist, but it does not give you the perfect price signals, in that case, what happens is, even though price signals do exist, demand curves do exist, these are not the perfect ones. As a result, the price signals that come out of this will not be the perfect one, and therefore its allocation of resources based on these will not be efficient ones. Okay. Then there is a question of perfect and imperfect goods. It is already 9:07. I think we'll have to stop here. So I think I'll stop here. Tomorrow in the morning, I'll quickly finish topic 2. We are left with how can the government deal with these market failures, and we'll also discuss about fiscal policy. Then we'll quickly move to money. So I'll stop here as far as this lecture is concerned. Whatever questions you have, please do post them. Okay. Thank you for now. Good night.